Hello everyone. In today's video we're going to finish off our series on later sources for Muhammad. And to begin with, today we'll be looking at what is believed to have been traced back to the Syriac common source, the Chronicle of Theophilus of Edessa, and that is the Chronicle of 1234. And then we shall look at what's called the Short Syriac Chronicle of 775. We will also look at the Zudnin Chronicle of 775, and we also will look at what is known as the Continuatio of Abu al-Fad's Samaritan Chronicle, which is believed to be traced to the 7th century. So a lot to cover today, and let's get started. So Stephen Shoemaker goes into quite a bit of explanation for why he believes the Chronicle of 1234 reflects very closely that of the Chronicle of Theophilus of Edessa of 750, which is now lost. I would suggest reading page 47 to 49 of his book, Death of a Prophet. We will go straight into the Chronicle of 1234. I quote, "Therefore this Muhammad, while in the measure and stature of youth, began to go up and come down from his city Yathrib to Palestine for the business of buying and selling. And while he was engaged in this region, he encountered the belief in one God, and it was pleasing to his eyes. And when he went back down to the people of his tribe, he set this belief before them. And when he persuaded a few, they followed him. And at the same time he would also extol for them the excellence of the land of Palestine, saying that, because of belief in the one God, such a good and fertile land has been given to them. And he would add, if you will listen to me, God will also give you a fine land flowing with milk and honey. And when he wanted to prove his word, he led a band of those who were obedient to him, and began to go up and plunder the land of Palestine, taking captives and pillaging. And he returned laden with booty and unharmed, and he did not fall short of his promise to them. Since the love of possessions drives such behaviour to become a habit, they began continually going out and coming back for plunder. And when those who were not yet following him saw those who had submitted to him becoming wealthy with an abundance of riches, they were drawn to his service without compulsion. And when, after these raids, the men followed him, became numerous, and were a great force, he no longer went forth, but allowed them to raid while he sat in honour in Yathrib, his city. And once they had been sent out, it was not enough for them to remain only in Palestine, but they were going much further afield, killing openly, taking captives, laying waste and pillaging. And even this was not enough for them, but they forced them to pay tribute and enslaved them. Thus they gradually grew strong and spread abroad, and they grew so powerful that they subjugated almost all the land of the Romans and the kingdom of the Persians under their authority." So there we have it. That is the Chronicle of 1234, and what's interesting is the city that is associated with Muhammad here is Yathrib. Now the question really is this the Yathrib which is now known as Medina, or is this the Yathrib which was found in Mesopotamia? It doesn't quite make that clear, and I suppose there's quite a debate to be had there, but it's generally assumed it's Medina. So this would suggest that Muhammad wasn't from Mecca, but Yathrib was his city. So we move on to the Short Syriac Chronicle of 775, and this one provides us with chronology. It should be pointed out that this chronology is more than likely erroneous, but nonetheless it may be worthwhile to listen to. It goes as follows: Morris 27 years and 6 months, Phocas 8 years, Heraclitus 24 years. In the year 930 of Alexander, Heraclius and the Romans entered Constantinople, and Muhammad and the Arabs went forth from the south and entered the land and subdued it. The years of the Hagarenes and the time when they entered Syria and took control from the year 933 of Alexander, each one of them by name as follows: Muhammad 10 years, Abu Bakr 1 year, Umar 12 years, Uthman 12 years, no king 5 years, Muawiyah 20 years, Yazid his son 3 years, no king for 9 months, Marwan 9 months, Abdul al-Malik 21 years, Walid his son 9 years, Suleiman 2 years and 7 months, Umar 2 years and 7 months, Yazid 4 years, 10 months, and 10 days. Stephen Shoemaker says, unfortunately, the chronicler's knowledge of early 7th century chronology was rather poor. As Palmer writes, this text is full of oddities. Of the Byzantine emperors, only Phocas reigned for a period approximately equivalent to that shown here. Of the Arab caliphs, Abu Bakr is curtailed and Umar I is prolonged. Perhaps the most peculiar item of all, however, is the implication that the Islamic conquest of Palestine took place in the year 618 to 619, while some of the Christian historical sources place the Islamic conquest before 632, none of them locates it this early. The date precedes even the Hijrah by 3 years. Strangely enough, however, a Syriac inscription from a North Syrian church dated to 780 bears the same information. In the year 930, the Arabs came to the land. Although Palmer and Hoyland both speculate as to possible explanation for this date, it remains a mystery. Nonetheless, for the present purposes, the text is clear. In spite of its rather idiosyncratic dating, this short chronicle identifies Muhammad as leading the Islamic invasion of the Roman Near East. So there you have it, quite an interesting one. So it confirms at the very least that Muhammad was involved in the invasion. And the date 930, which is referred to as 930 AG, is equivalent of 618 CE Common Era or AD Anno Domini. So now we move on to the Zucknen Chronicle, which is dated to 775 CE. Stephen Shoemaker tells us roughly contemporary with the preceding text is an anonymous chronicle written at the monastery of Zucknen near Amida sometime around 775. Unfortunately, these two chronicles have more in common than just their date of composition. The Zucknen Chronicle's chronology is also very weak during the period of the Islamic conquest. In fact, its author warns his readers that he was unable to find reliable sources for most of the 7th and 8th centuries. From that point, 574 AD, up to the present 775, it says, I have not found a history concerning events which is composed on such solid foundations as the former ones, that is, Eusebius, Socrates, John of Ephesus. In view of the author's own awareness of the rather poor sources at his disposal, one can hardly fault him for his mistakes in chronology. In quote there. So, quite amazing, isn't it, that even as early as 775, some of the chroniclers are admitting to the poor records that are there even then. So it really begs the question, how can we be sure of what happened in those early days when the people from that time scratch their own heads and wonder what exactly happened? The records were very poor. So anyway, here, for what it's worth, is his chronicle. In 621, the Arabs conquered the land of Palestine all the way to the Euphrates River, and the Romans fled and crossed over to the east of the Euphrates. And the Arabs ruled over them in it, that is, Palestine. Their first king was a man from among them whose name was Muhammad. They also called this man a prophet because he turned them away from cults of every sort, and taught them that there is one God, the maker of creation. And he established laws for them because they were especially devoted to the worship of demons, the veneration of idols, and especially the veneration of trees. And because he had shown them the one God, and they had defeated the Romans in battle under his leadership, and he had established laws for them according to their desire, they called him a prophet and a messenger of God. Stephen Shoemaker says, the entry for this year concludes with some brief polemical remarks accusing the Arabs of being an especially greedy and carnal people who follow only such laws as suit their desires. So I suppose the key thing to draw from this is, again, it suggests that Muhammad is alive and leading the Muslims during the conquest of Palestine. So it's another evidence for that. So our next source is a report from the Continuatio of Abu al-Fads, and this is a Samaritan chronicle, believed to be from the 7th century. And I think it's quite evident that this is based on eyewitness accounts, because it's very close to the place and time. After this, the Ishmaelites, Muhammad, and all his army went forth to wage war against the Byzantines. They conquered the land and defeated the Byzantines and killed them as they fled before them. The Imam in those days was Akbun bin el-Azhar, who lived in Beit Sama. When the Muslims attacked and the Byzantines fled, all of the Samaritans who lived along the coast fled with the Byzantines from the advancing Muslims, thinking that they would return. When the Samaritans began to leave with the Byzantines for Byzantium, Rumia, they came to the Ras Akbun bin el-Azhar, to Beit Sama, because he lived there, and said to him, "You are a trustworthy man, so we will deposit our possessions with you until we return," thinking that they would be returning soon. The people who deposited their wealth were the people of Caesarea, Arsuf, Meumas, Jaffa, Lida, Ascalon, Gaza, and all of the interior villages, and those along the coast. And after this they left for Byzantium, and remained there and have not returned to this day. The Muslims rose and entered the land of Canaan, and took control of it, and they seized all the cities and inhabited them, and ruled over all the places, until there was no place left which they had not taken over but Caesarea, which rebelled and did not submit to them because it was called the mother of cities, and took precedence over them. The Muslims set up camp against it and besieged it for 6 years before they conquered it. After they captured it, every place else stood in awe of them. So there you have it. Again, this would suggest that Muhammad was leading the conflict into Palestine, even though it's not 100% clear. It certainly insinuates that. Now, there's a little bit more in Stephen Shoemaker's account of the Continuatio. The Arab expulsion of the Byzantines is described with approval, and the terms of Islamic governance are met with neutral acceptance. Of Muhammad, the Continuatio says, rather astonishingly, that the Prophet of Islam did not cause anyone distress throughout his life. He would present his belief before the people, accepting anyone who came to him, yet not compelling one who did not. End quote. His immediate successors, the chronicle continues, ruled according to what he had enjoined upon them. They did so more or less, and did not harm anyone. It is a portrait of Islam's emergence within Palestine that comports rather well, as Levi Rubin notes, with what can otherwise be known about this period. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine that such a favourable account would have been composed much beyond the first several decades of Islamic rule, after which social and economic pressure on the dhimmis, that is, non-Muslim people, was increased. Consequently, when all the relevant factors are taken into consideration, this view of the early Islamic conquest from Samaria has much to recommend it, and its notice of Muhammad's involvement during the invasion warrants its inclusion alongside these other early witnesses to this tradition. So again, this is just further confirmation that Muhammad was alive during the conquest of Palestine. Okay, so we've finished looking at all of the sources from the 7th and 8th century. So I thought it would be a good idea to summarize all of that and try and make sense of it. So the way I've done this is I have looked at data about Muhammad on one side, so different areas of focus, what the name of the sources were and their dates, and particular quotations from it that gives us the information. So if we look at, for example, the idea of Muhammad being a prophet or a preacher with a spiritual motivation, we have Doctrina Jacobi Nuber Baptizati. As we can see, it's an early date, 634 to 640. And there's this following quote: "What can you tell me about the prophet who has appeared with the Saracens?" And the reply is, "He is false, for the prophets do not come armed with a sword." So there's your first testimony there. And then we have, on the same topic, from Sebius, Bishop of Bagrat, Tunis, of the 660s, it says, "At that time a certain man that should be among those same sons of Ishmael, whose name was Mahmud, a merchant, as if by God's command, appeared to them as a preacher and the path of truth. He taught them to recognize the God of Abraham, especially because he was learnt and informed in the history of Moses. Now, because the command was on high, as a single order, they all came together in unity of religion, abandoning their vain cults. They turned to the living God who had appeared to their father Abraham. So Muhammad legislated for them not to eat carrion, not to drink wine, not to speak falsely, and not to engage in fornication. He said, with an oath, God promised this land to Abraham and his seed after him forever. And he brought about as he promised during that time while he loved Ishmael. But now you are the sons of Abraham, and God is accomplishing his promise to Abraham and his seed for you. Love sincerely only the God of Abraham, and go and seize the land which God gave to your father Abraham. No one will be able to resist you in battle, because God is with you." So there we have it. So another reference to whether Muhammad was a prophet or a preacher is in the Gospel of the 12 Apostles, which is from 72 to 87 AH, or 692 to 705 CE. And it says, "And there shall rise up from among them a warrior, and one whom they call a prophet, and they shall be brought into his hands, and the south shall prosper, and by the hoofs of the horses of its armies it shall trample down and subdue Persia and devastate Rome." Another one, the history of the patriarchs of Alexandria, 96 to 97 AH, or 715 CE. "But after a few days there appeared a man of the Arabs from the southern districts, that is to say from Mecca or its neighbourhood, whose name was Muhammad, and he brought back the worshippers of idols to the knowledge of the one God, and bade them declare that Muhammad was his apostle." There we have it. Okay. We also have in the Secrets of Rabbi Shimon, 744, he raises over them a crazy prophet possessed by a spirit, and he conquers the land for them. We also find in the Suknen Chronicle of 775, "Their first king was a man from among them whose name was Muhammad. They also called this man a prophet because he turned them away from cults of every sort and taught them that there is one God, the maker of creation. He established laws for them because they were especially devoted to the worship of demons, the veneration of idols, and especially the veneration of trees. They called him a prophet and a messenger of God," it says at the end. Okay, So St. John of Damascus, again we're looking at whether he was a prophet and preacher. St. John of Damascus in Fount of Knowledge 749 says the following: From that time to the present a false prophet named Muhammad has appeared in their midst. This man, after having chanced upon the Old and New Testaments, and likewise, it seems, having conversed with an Arian monk, devised his own heresy. Then, after having insinuated himself into the good graces of the people by a show of seeming piety, he gave out that a certain book had been sent down to him from heaven. He had set down some ridiculous compositions in this book of his, and he gave it to them as an object of veneration. Okay, so that's the prophet part looked at. Now we're going to look at the idea of him being a king or a leader. So we start with a chronicler of Khuzestan from the 660s. Then God raised up against them the sons of Ishmael, numerous as the sand of the seashore, whose leader was Muhammad. Something just to say in passing, that not only are the dates here varying, it's a selection of sources from a wide period of time, but also the geography of where these sources are from. So we're seeing a reasonably consistent message across time and across geographical areas. Okay. Fragments of the chart of Jacob, or James of Edessa, 692 CE. It says 622 CE, Muhammad, the first king of the Arabs, began to reign 7 years. And in Ad Anam 705, 86 to 96 AH, or 705 to 715 CE, which I think I've said already. Muhammad came upon the earth in 932 of Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, i.e. 620-621. He reigned for 7 years. So again, this idea of him being a leader and a reigner. The Zut-Nen Chronicles 775. Their first king was a man from among them whose name was Muhammad. Now, moving on to another area, the idea of him being a merchant. So we have Sabius, bishop of Bagrat, Tunis, from the 660s. At that time, a certain man from among those same sons of Ishmael, whose name was Muhammad, a merchant. So we see this idea of him being a merchant there. So in the fragments of the chart of Jacob of Edessa, which is dated to 692 CE, besides where it says the years 293, 294, it has the following: and Muhammad goes down on commercial businesses to the lands of Palestine and of the Arabias and of Phoenicia and of the Tyrians. Now, what year is 293, 294? That equates to 619, 620 AD. So it's saying during those years he was going on business, on trades and various sorts of things like that in that year. Okay, so that's it with Muhammad being a merchant. So we move on to the idea of him being a warrior. This comes from the Gospel of the 12 Apostles, which is dated from 692 to 705 CE. And there shall arise from among them a warrior, and one whom they call a prophet, and they shall be brought into his hands, and so on. You can read it there for yourself. Now, we also have the idea of him being a guide and an instructor, which is similar to him being a prophet, but I chose to put it in a separate category. So this is from John Barpin Kaye from 690. And if we go about halfway down, at the beginnings they kept to the traditions of Muhammad, who was their instructor, Tara, to such an extent that they inflicted the death penalty on anyone who was seen to act brazenly against his laws. Actually up here it also says, for they held, as I've said above, an ordinance stemming from the man who was their guide. So there you have it. You have a reference to him being a guide and an instructor. Good. Now to the idea of whom the Arabs derived their authority. So where do we find that? Well, we find that in the Maronite Chronicle, which is from 665 CE. Furthermore, Muawiyah did not wear a crown like other kings in the world. He placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to the seat of Muhammad, which is an indication of Muhammad's authority, this seat. It doesn't say where that seat was. Was it Yathrib? Was it Mecca? It doesn't say. And we also have a similar idea here, a record of the Arab conquest of Syria from 637 CE, so this is an early one. And many villages were ruined with killing by the Arabs of Muhammad, and a great number of people were killed, and captives were taken from Galilee as far as Beth something. Notice the idea of the Arabs of Muhammad, which suggests that they got their authority from Muhammad. They followed him. Now, also, whom the Arabs derived their authority, especially when battling their opponents. Thomas the Presbyter, 640 CE, quite an early one. AG 945, Indiction 7, on Friday the 4th of February, at the 9th hour, there was a battle between the Romans and the Arabs of Muhammad in Palestine, 12 miles east of Gaza. So the idea that they are following the authority of Muhammad is clearly given there. The Arabs of Muhammad. Tayyaye de Muhammad. Negotiating treaties, and also an interesting bit of data from the history of the Patriarchs of Alexandria from 715 CE. After fighting 3 battles with the Romans conquered them. So when the chief men of the city saw these things, they went to Amir and received a certificate of security for the city, that it might not be plundered. This kind of treaty which Muhammad, the chief of the Arabs, taught them, they called the law. And he says with regard to it, as for the province of Egypt and any city that agrees with its inhabitants to pay the land tax to you and to submit to your authority, make a treaty with them and do them no injury. But plunder and take as prisoners those that will not consent to this and resist you. For this reason the Muslims kept their hands off the province and its inhabitants, but destroyed the nation of the Romans, and their general who was named Marianus. And those of the Romans who escaped fled to Alexandria, and shut its gates upon the Arabs, and fortified themselves within the city. We also have another reference to negotiating treaties in the 10 Kings Midrash from 744. It says, at the beginning of his dominion, when he goes forth, he will seek to do harm to Israel, but great men of Israel will join with him and give him a wife from among them, and there will be peace between him and Israel. So there we have it. We also have a reference to his character in a number of sources. If we begin with the Byzantine Arab Chronicle of 741-754, we get the impression that he is prudent. It says, born of a most noble tribe of that people, he was a very prudent man and a foreseer of very many future events. He is the one whom they hold in such high regard and reverence until this day, that they declare him to be the apostle and prophet in all of their rituals and writings. However, in the Hispanic Chronicle of 754, we get a different depiction of his character, which is that of being sly or cunning, which is kind of connected to being prudent, but it has a different insinuation. It says the Saracens rebelled in 618, the 7th year of the Emperor Heraclius, and appropriated for themselves Syria, Arabia, and Mesopotamia, more through trickery than through the power of their leader Muhammad, and they devastated the neighbouring provinces, proceeding not so much by means of open attacks as by secret incursions. Thus, by means of cunning and fraud, rather than power, they incited all the former cities of the empire, and finally rebelled openly, shaking the yoke from their necks. So we see here Muhammad using what's referred to as asymmetric warfare. It's actually quite an advanced form of warfare, to give him his due. Now, where did he come from? This is also an interesting area to look at. This is from the History of the Patriarchs of Alexandria, 715 CE. So it says, "But after a few days there appeared a man of the Arabs from the southern districts, that is to say from Mecca or its neighbourhood, whose name was Muhammad." Now we won't read the whole bit, but you can see there it suggests he was from Mecca or its neighbourhood. It says at the end, "His nation was circumcised in the flesh, not by the law, and prayed towards the south, turning towards a place which they called the Kaaba." But was that what we call Mecca today? Now, we also have the short Syriac chronicle of 775. It just says, "And Muhammad and the Arabs went forth from the south and entered the land and subdued it." Yeah, not much help that one, but at least it suggests he came from the south. Again, where did he come from? Chronicle of 1234, based on Dionysius' Chronicle of 845, which is based on the Chronicle of Theophilus of Edessa, 750. It says, "Therefore, this Muhammad, while in the measure and stature of youth, began to go up and come down from his city, Yathrib, to Palestine, for the business of buying and selling." So there's a contradiction. Seems to suggest that his city was actually Yathrib, wherever that was. That could be the Yathrib of Medina in Arabia, or it could be perhaps the Yathrib which is found in Mesopotamia. It'd be interesting to find out which that would be. Now, where did he come from? Thomas Artsruni, 887. We have the source for this given there. "At that time, in a place of Petrea, Arabia, Faran, named Mecca, the Mecca, he showed himself to brothers, bandits, warriors, and band chiefs, who were worshipping in a temple the idols of Ammonites, Samam, and Kabar." A note from Dan Gibson. In this account, the writer Thomas Artsruni tells us that the Prophet Muhammad was not born and raised in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, but that he lived in a city called Mecca in the general area of Paran in Arabia, Petrea. Here the writer clearly calls it the Mecca and places it in southern Jordan, where the two Petras, or rocks, existed. If this is so, then Petra was also identified as Mecca at one time. The existence of two Meccas would certainly clear up the reason why Petra is continually referred to as Mecca in the Islamic accounts. The conflict between Mecca and Yathrib can be resolved by making Yathrib the place of his birth and where he grew up, and Petra was where he later lived. So that's quite an interesting contribution there. Now, what were his actual words? From the Chronicle of 1234, based on Dionysius' Chronicle, based on Chronicle of Theophilus of Edessa, 750, we have a direct quote. "Because of belief in the one God, such a good and fertile land has been given to them." These are direct words from Muhammad, supposedly. We also have the following. "If you will listen to me, God will also give you a fine land flowing with milk and honey." Again, we have the following. In the Doctrina Jacobi Nuper Baptizati, this is a very early source, 634 to 640, he said he had the keys of paradise. Now this, I have inverted commas because it's referred to in the source, but whether he literally said, "I have the keys of paradise," directly like that, it's hard to know, but this is a paraphrase of what he said, presumably. Again, from the same source, the arrival of the Anointed One who is to come, the Messiah. So he said, he taught, in fact, that the arrival of the Anointed One who is to come, the Messiah, is imminent. This is part of what he said. Again, that's not a direct quote. It's a paraphrase of what he was teaching about. What did he preach about? So this is very much connected. From the History of the Patriarchs of Alexandria, 715 CE. He brought back the worshippers of idols to the knowledge of one God and bade them declare that Muhammad was his apostle. What did he preach about? According to Umar's letter to Leo, 8th century, circa 717 to 720, and this is a paraphrase, Muhammad had brought monotheism to his people, a people who had never before received any prophet or any scripture, a nation of ignorant people worshipping idols. Now, what did he preach about? Sebius, bishop of Bagrat, Tunis, 660s. So Muhammad legislated for them not to eat carrion, not to drink wine, not to speak falsely, and not to engage in fornication. Again, what did he preach about? St. John of Damascus, font of knowledge, 749. We have the following. The following might be based on an assumption that Muhammad wrote the Quran rather than sources prior to the Quran, so I just put that in just to kind of warn you, so it may not be all that reliable. He says that there is one God, creator of all things, who has neither been begotten nor has begotten. He says that the Christ is the Word of God and his Spirit, but a creature and a servant, and that he was begotten without seed of Mary, the sister of Moses and Aaron. For he says the Word and God and the Spirit entered into Mary, and she brought forth Jesus, who was a prophet and a servant of God. And he says that the Jews wanted to crucify him in violation of the law, and that they seized his shadow and crucified this. But the Christ himself was not crucified, he says, nor did he die, for God, out of his love for him, took him to himself into heaven. And he says this, that when the Christ had ascended into heaven, God asked him, O Jesus, didst thou say, I am the Son of God and God? And Jesus, he says, answered, Be merciful to me, Lord. Thou knowest that I did not say this, and that I did not scorn to be thy servant, but sinful men have written that I made this statement, and they have lied about me, and have fallen into error. And God answered and said to him, I know that thou didst not say this word. Again, from St. John of Damascus, he made it a law that they be circumcised, and the women too, and he ordered them not to keep the Sabbath, and not to be baptized. And while he ordered them to eat some of the things forbidden by the law, he ordered them to abstain from others. He furthermore absolutely forbade the drinking of wine. The following shows that even the earlier sources can't get a clear picture of when he reigned and when he died. Some suggest he died before 632, some after 632. So here we go. So Jacob of Edessa suggests that his rule started in 620 or 621, and he ruled for 7 years. If we compare that to the Doctrina Jacobi, which is a very early source, he is still reigning in 634, which is a bit odd. We see also in Jacob of Edessa's account that Abu Bakr reigned for 2 years and 7 months. In the Byzantine Arab Chronicle of 741, we see that Muhammad rules for 10 years. And it says that Abu Bakr ruled for almost 3 years, which is compatible with the Jacob of Edessa account. It says that Umar ruled for 10 years and Uthman for 12 years. In the Hispanic account, Muhammad's reign begins in 618 and lasts for 10 years. So let's just go up for a second and just compare that. Okay. So Jacob of Edessa says it wasn't 618, it was 620. So there's a difference there. The length of the reign is different. Notice the length of the reign is different. Now, if we add that together, that would mean that he reigned till 628. Here, if we add that together, we could potentially have 628 the end of his reign. So that tallies at least, but the beginning date is wrong. It says that Abu Bakr reigned for almost 3 years, so that's very similar to this chronicle here. So that's that. It's been a long road. We've covered a lot of sources. It was my mission a few months ago to try and bring together all of these sources together on YouTube for the first time, and I have managed to do that. As we can see, there are some things which all the sources have in common, but there's a lot of conflict between the different sources, and I leave it to wiser and more informed people than myself to argue and debate about what it all means and whether we can deduce anything of much value from all of these sources. One thing I would suggest tentatively is that when we look at all the sources from the early days to the later days, say from the early 7th century all the way up to the late 8th century, what we see is a deterioration in knowledge about Muhammad. Yes, the quantity is increasing, but the reliability of the dates and chronology is seriously suspect, and it contradicts itself all over the place. And this means that we have to take a lot of the Islamic histories with a pinch of salt, a massive pinch of salt for that matter. So thank you for watching. I apologize if this video has dragged on, but obviously I was trying to cover a lot of ground. I will talk to you soon. Bye.